In today's video, we'll take a brief look at the lives of Emperor Franz Joseph I's parents. We'll start out with Archduke Franz Karl Joseph of Austria. Franz Karl Joseph of Austria was born on December 7, 1802 in Vienna. He was the third son of Emperor Franz II and his second wife, Maria Theresa of Naples, Sicily, who was a daughter of King Ferdinand I of the Two Sicilies, and his wife, Archduchess Maria Carolina of Austria. Franz Karl did not have 8 great-grandparents, but only 4 so-called ancestral laws, the 2 ruling couples Franz I and Maria Theresa of Austria, and Charles III and Maria Amalia of Spain. On November 4, 1824, he married Princess Sophie Friederike of Bavaria. She was the daughter of Maximilian I of Bavaria and his second wife Caroline Friederike Wilhelmine of Baden. Although Franz Karl was rather insignificant for the history of Austria, he was involved in the secret state conference that guided the country's destiny because his brother Emperor Ferdinand I was incapable of ruling. At the insistence of his wife Sophie, Franz Karl renounced his claim to the imperial throne in favor of his son Franz Joseph when Ferdinand I abdicated. Franz Karl was very interested in art and culture. He often acted as a patron of cultural institutions. After the birth of his children, Franz Karl often traveled alone to the Salzkammergut to hunt and attend performances at the theater in Bad Ischl. This provincial theater, with extremely mediocre performances, lacked money at every turn, and those responsible for the theater had been looking for a generous patron for some time. Franz Karl became the savior in need when the theater was on the verge of ruin. He bought all the tickets for all the performances during his stay in the region and sat in the otherwise empty theater for evenings on end, together with a few people from his court. These private performances had a program entirely according to his wishes. Before his return to Vienna, he paid the actors their fees for the whole year. Because of his generosity, he was very popular in Bad Ischl. Franz Karl died in Vienna on 1878, outliving his wife by 6 years. He was the last Habsburg royal to be buried in Vienna according to the old court protocol of separate burial. The urn in the heart of the Loreto Chapel of the Augustinian Church, the entrails in the ducal crypt of St. Stephen's Cathedral, and the rest of the body in the Kapuziner Gruft. Franz Karl's wife, Sophie Friederike Dorothea Wilhelmine of Bavaria, was born on January 27, 1805 in Munich. She was the daughter of Maximilian I Joseph of Bavaria and his second wife, Caroline Friederike Wilhelmine of Baden. Sophie was a sister of Ludovica Wilhelmine of Bavaria, who was the mother of the future Empress Elisabeth of Austria-Hungary, also named Sisi. Sisi would go on to marry Sophie's son, Emperor Franz Joseph I. Sisi was thus not only Sophie's niece, but also her daughter-in-law. Contrary to the customs of the time, Sophie's parents took personal care of their children. They wanted to educate them to become modern-minded people. Sophie was considered an exceptionally pretty girl and was later included by her half-brother, King Ludwig I, in his famous Gallery of Beauty, which can still be seen today in Nymphenburg Palace. The union between Sophie and Franz Karl, who was a son of the Emperor Franz I of Austria, was extremely important to Sophie's father. Franz Karl was second in line to the Habsburg throne, and the actual heir to the throne, Ferdinand, was considered unlikely ever to ascend due to his severe epilepsy. Sophie's first meeting with her future husband was not to the young woman's liking, but political reasons had priority, and the wedding between Sophie and Franz Karl took place in Vienna on November 4, 1824. After 6 years of marriage and several miscarriages, Sophie finally gave birth to the couple's first child. 5 children were born of the marriage. Franz Joseph, who became Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria, Franz Joseph married his first cousin, Sisi. Maximilian, who became Maximilian I of Mexico, he married Charlotte, Princess of Belgium, and was executed by the Mexican Republic on June 19, 1867. Karl Ludwig, who married 3 times. Karl Ludwig was the father of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, whose assassination in 1914 sparked World War I. A stillborn son. And lastly, Ludwig Victor, who never married. Despite earlier assumptions, Franz Karl's brother Ferdinand did ascend the Austrian imperial throne after the death of Franz I. But as a result of the revolutions of 1848 in the Austrian Empire, Ferdinand I abdicated and Franz Karl renounced the throne in favor of his son Franz Joseph. Thus, Franz Joseph became the Emperor of Austria on December 2, 1848, at the age of 18. During Franz Joseph's first year in power, Sophie became one of the most important advisors to the inexperienced emperor. The view propagated by Egon Caesar Conte Corti and later in the Sissi films that Sophie was a wicked mother-in-law to Sissi is not correct. Sophie's correspondence shows she never spoke a bad word about the young empress in her letters to other family members. Sophie became godmother to Sophie Friederike, the first child and daughter of Franz Joseph I and Sissi. Sadly, the child died at the age of 2. When her son Maximilian, Emperor of Mexico, was executed by firing squad on June 19, 1867, Sophie became severely depressed. In May 1872, she contracted severe pneumonia. Consequently, Sophie Friederike Dorothea Wilhelmine of Bavaria died on May 28, 1872. Sophie was buried in the Kapuziner Gruft in Vienna. Between the tombs of Sophie and her husband Franz Karl, their stillborn son is laid to rest. Thank you for watching.